I'm going to talk to you about is turning pastures into protein, and just the basics. What are the opportunities and threats in this changing world and changing environment? So I spent about 6 years on the Evergraze experiment. Evergraze was all about promoting perennial pastures in the pasture system, in your livestock system, and that's a picture from our site. And we'll talk a little bit about those two different management effects. So I guess one of the major opportunities that all small landholders, whether you've got 10 sheep or 10,000 sheep, is to improve your soil health. And improving your soil health obviously has that buffer against those climate extremes as well. So some of the Gindera experiment from down at Canberra showed that adding single super phosphorus can obviously have big impacts for your production. So on the left of that fence there is unfertilised, on the right is fertilised with single super. There are results on the New South Wales DPI website about that experiment, but my point here is you do need to add those inputs. But you do need legumes. Actually, yesterday I was out at Goolagong speaking to a group of about 16 farmers about legumes in their system and promoting legume growth. Some of the new legumes that they're researching at the moment are Cerridellas. Cerridellas have an excellent ability to source phosphorus from the soil because of their nice fine root hairs. So as single super phosphorus declines and the stocks of single super decline, we need to look at some of these newer varieties of legumes to try and help pump natural nitrogen into the system and promote grass growth. So the Cerridellas are looking quite promising in that respect. And all about legumes, like I was talking to the farmers there yesterday, is making sure that we pump as much nitrogen into the system as possible. Estimates from a study a few years back estimate about $4 million worth of nitrogen is pumped into the Australian agricultural soils each year. 4 billion is a fair bit of money, but that's free nitrogen coming from the air. So to ignore our legumes is to do harm to the environment. This is an experiment that was conducted in New Zealand. This is looking at, so we've got lucerne and a legume at the top here, quite flat lining, obviously with N fertiliser treatment, but you can see the annual ryegrass responds to that nitrogen. So the more legumes that you can have in your pasture system working in combination with your grasses, the better production you can have. So the second one is to optimise the number of stock running on your farm without any detriment to your environment. So my point here is that I think a lot of Australian farmers have a little bit of maturity to come along as far as their standing in animal welfare standards globally. I think we do an excellent job. I think it would be remiss of us to think that running less animals on our land is good globally for animal welfare. Therefore, if you can run more animals, that means those animals are being looked after a lot better in our environment because we've got policies and procedures in place like RSPCA that look over our shoulder and make sure that we're looking after those animals well. So if you're running only 2 sheep to the hectare here, and you could be running 10 sheep, those other 8 sheep could potentially be produced in a country where those animal welfare standards are not quite as up to ours. On the 4th of October is World Animal Day. Some of those other opportunities that we've got is monitoring your livestock. Just keeping an eye on those condition scores and fat scores of the livestock that you're keeping on your small farm or large farm. Some of those opportunities to learn about monitoring livestock are the training opportunities that local land services offer. That's a picture of one of our district vets, Amy Masters, at the Australian National Field Days, training up some local farmers on how to fat score and condition score your sheep. I guess it's just like a superannuation portfolio. You need to know what those sheep are doing, dividends, whether they're actually performing for you. And you need to look after their welfare. And you do that by having healthy soils, and perennial pastures. Again, looking after your pastures and monitoring your pastures is a real key to profitability and environmental outcomes. There's plenty of ways to measure those pastures, but Local Land Services staff are here, myself and Brett Littler over in Mudgee, he's our livestock officer, offer ProGraze courses, and we've got a ProGraze course starting in July. We are also offering pasture and livestock assessment one-day events that will start in July as well. They're only $20 per person, and the first one's in Woodstock. So the other thing is the right plant for the right place and the right purpose. That's one of those sayings that we had in Evergraze, and it was looking at your farm, and not just your farm but your paddock as well, because there's so much variability in soil type and soil depth and chemistry in each paddock. We need to put the right plant in the right place and manage those plants correctly. So part of my research work with New South Wales DPI before I joined LLS was a AWI grazing management experiment just across the road here, and we looked at those management principles. And some of those treatment management principles that we looked at, we compared rotational grazing to continuous grazing. So those sheep were in that paddock all year round, compared to some sheep that were rotated throughout the paddocks. So we looked at environmental measures, the bare ground percentage, that's how much soil was actually exposed in those pastures, compared to your gross margin. And one of the systems that did quite well was the high stocking rate 30 paddock system. So we had two different stocking rates. One was 6 wethers to the hectare, the other was 12 wethers to the hectare. And profitability wise, and also reasonably quite good in the bare ground percentage, was the high stocking rate rotational system. But interestingly, the continuous graze system was quite good as well in profit and bare ground percentage. So it's not always about the grazing system that you have, it's a lot about the actual stocking rates that you have, and what Jess was talking about, how those climate changes influence your stocking rate and those number of hot days per year. As they increase, you've always got one hand on the stocking rate lever and having to destock. Some of these ones that didn't go too well in the bare ground percentage was a high stocking rate continuous graze. So there's no surprises there at all. Obviously with those sheep in that paddock all year round, no rest whatsoever, you're going to have a heck of a lot more bare ground. And potentially longer term impacts on your perennial grasses. That is the slow rotation 30 paddock system. You can see there's a lot more dead grass in that system when we measured in that experiment, which provided a lot less quality for the animals grazing in that system. When you compare that to the flexible management system, where we're looking at animal benefits as well as pasture benefits, and we had benchmarks for both, we didn't actually graze these paddocks until they were 3-leaf stage. The coxswain perennial grass that we had in this system was not grazed until it was 3-leaf. So that gave the grass enough time to replenish its water-soluble carbohydrates in the root system before we graze that paddock again. Also, the quality of that feed was a heck of a lot better. So we were looking after the grass, the pasture, the soil, and the animal in that particular system. Whereas the continuous graze system, you can see, is there's quite a bit of bare ground. And in January 2014, some of those hot weather events, completely out of soil moisture, and you can see that result. So some of those risks I see is poor soil fertility. We run quite a few soil and pasture workshops throughout the region, and less than 30% of those soil tests that we do for farmers have adequate phosphorus levels or adequate sulphur levels. If we run down that soil fertility, that can lead to poor ground cover. This is a really old experiment done on ground cover and soil movement at Tamworth. You can see the nil fertiliser treatment over here and the 10 kilos of phosphorus and 25 kilos of sulphur over on the right. So those fertilisers do have an impact on environment. They do help your grasses and legumes grow. So that poor ground cover can lead to weed invasion, something that's very topical for this region and also down Cowra way. It's only anecdotal, there's no data on it, but thank you. Some of the summer-growing perennial noxious weeds have certainly invaded that Cowra area, and whether it's a result of more summer storms than usual, I don't know. But that's one of the real risks that you have of depleting that soil fertility is weed invasion. And one of the best ways to prevent serrated tussock, for example, which you see in this photo, is not a chemical, it's not ploughing it out, it's actually competition. So it's competition from perennial grasses. So if you look after your perennial grasses and your ground cover, whatever the climate throws at you, you'll have less of these noxious weeds coming and invading your plot. And just like Jess said, seek professional advice. Talk to your commercial agronomist. If you're not happy with what he said, talk to another agronomist. Claire Edwards looks after the Mudgee region, Lithgow region, Oberon region. I look after Cowra, Cabon, Orange, Blaney and half of Bathurst. And the other real take-home message is don't guess, do a test, whether it be tissue sampling, feed testing or soil sampling. What we've found throughout all our soil workshops is that not enough farmers are out there actually testing their soil to find out whether the fertilisers that they're putting on is enough or too much. So get along to one of our days. We've got some upcoming events coming up. Next week on Thursday from 8:30 to 11:30 is a soil and pasture health workshop here at Orange. On the 13th of June is a vertebrate pest training in Bathurst with Scotty Sullivan. There's a climate and ag production information session at Blaney on the 15th of June. Anthony Clark from New South Wales DPI will be talking at that one. 16th is a soil and pasture workshop at Yagara, and 17th is another one on a Saturday in Orange. Poisonous Plants Day in Blaney, and the first pasture and livestock assessment workshop is to be held in Woodstock. Thanks very much for your time.